At 11 a.m. on December 13th, 2016, Alan Thicke, the actor and songwriter most famous for his portrayal of Dr. Jason Seaver for 7 seasons on the hit ABC sitcom Growing Pains, drove himself and his 19-year-old son Carter to the Pickwick Ice Rink in Burbank, California, for a hockey game with friends. Thicke was almost 70 and in great shape, having kept himself thin and muscular, largely thanks to regular hockey games with his kids and his friends, often at this very same rink. Thicke loved hockey his whole life, having grown up in a small mining town in a remote part of Ontario, Canada, 350 miles north of Toronto, where hockey was a town-wide obsession. Thicke confessed he was never very good at the sport, but he nevertheless played as much as he could throughout his childhood and rarely missed a Maple Leafs game on TV. Even after Thicke found success as an actor, he played quite a bit of recreational hockey and frequently incorporated hockey themes into his work and participated in charity hockey events. He actually lost 5 teeth in 2003 when he was hit by a puck in the mouth during a fundraiser. But despite the injury, he remained passionate about the sport all of his life and passed that enthusiasm along to his 3 children, including, in particular, his youngest son, Carter. At the ice rink that morning, everything was normal. Thicke was happy and talkative and in his usual good spirits. When the game began, Thicke completed his first 2 shifts. That's hockey parlance for a player's time on the ice before they head to the bench for a breather, and was just skating onto the ice a 3rd time when he was hit with overwhelming pain in his upper chest and back, and he collapsed onto the ice. He was helped to the bench by concerned teammates while he clutched his chest. He moaned in pain and then hunched forward and vomited. He started to feel better and must have assumed he was suffering from a stomach bug or food poisoning, and he told the others to continue playing without him. Most did, except for Carter, who stayed with his father. Thicke insisted he was fine, but Carter knew better, and despite his father's objections, he asked someone nearby to call 911. Over the next few minutes, Thicke felt good enough to joke with teammates and then with paramedics while they took his vitals and then strapped him to a gurney. As he was being wheeled towards the ambulance, he asked Carter to snap a photo of him with the ice rink in the background, and then he flashed a thumbs up at his son before the ambulance doors closed. During the 1-mile ride to Providence St. Joseph's Medical Center, paramedics placed an oxygen mask over Thicke's mouth and ran an EKG that came back normal, ruling out a heart attack. But the pain in his chest started to worsen as they approached the hospital. The cardiac team met Thicke on arrival at the ER and immediately ordered a CAT scan of his chest. It revealed their worst fears. Thicke's aorta had ruptured, and they had to perform immediate open-heart surgery if he was going to have any chance to survive. He was rushed into the OR where doctors opened his chest. Thicke's chest cavity was full of blood as it spilled freely from the tear in the aorta. The doctors went to work, and for nearly 2 hours they tried to fix the damaged artery, battling against time as more and more blood was lost. But despite their best efforts, the trauma to his heart and the blood he had lost were too much for his body to bear, and he passed away on the operating table. Alan Thicke was 69 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Alan Thicke.
The other people at the hockey rink that morning were stunned to learn Thicke had died. To a person, they talked about how after the initial chest pain and subsequent vomiting, he quickly regained his color and was casually chatting with friends. How could someone who was apparently feeling fine go so far south so quickly? The answer lies in the nature of Thicke's coronary event. Thicke suffered what is known as acute aortic dissection, which occurs when there is a tear in the innermost layer of the aorta, the major artery coming out of the heart which delivers oxygenated blood to the body. There are myriad factors that can contribute to an elevated risk of aortic tears, although high blood pressure is the primary culprit. Regardless of the cause, once the tear happens, blood will begin to dissect or flood into the first layer of the aortic wall. As the dissection progresses, the rushing blood quickly tears through layer after layer of the aorta until it reaches the exterior arterial wall and ultimately breaks through, allowing blood to pump freely into the chest cavity. Until the moment of the dissection, the aorta remains fully intact and serves its circulatory function. But once the dissection happens and the blood within the aorta tears through the arterial walls, the individual feels an intense tearing or ripping sensation in their upper back and chest, and the pain is just excruciating. The aorta is enveloped with sympathetic nerve endings. It is often described as a fine mesh covering of delicate nerves latticing the aorta walls. And when a rupture occurs, those nerve endings send a flood of pain signals to the brain. Thus, Alan Thicke felt perfectly normal during his first few minutes skating because there was nothing wrong with him. His aorta was fully intact and was dutifully delivering oxygenated blood to his tissues and bodily organs. But when the rupture occurred and the network of nerve endings transmitted their pain signals to his brain, it was so intense it caused him to collapse. Thicke then vomited, which is a common occurrence in traumatic cardiac events, which was then followed by a brief period of calm, during which the pain subsided. Though Thicke likely assumed that the diminution of pain was related to the vomiting, it almost certainly wasn't. Instead, it was a sign that the aortic tear was complete. But over the next few minutes, while Thicke was strapped to the gurney and loaded into the ambulance, the building pressure within his blood-filled chest cavity caused him renewed discomfort.
Once the doctors did the CAT scan and saw the extent of the damage, they likely knew that Thicke was not going to survive. Though some patients who suffer less catastrophic ruptures and get immediate medical attention do survive dissections, most victims either die on the spot or, in some cases, after reaching the hospital, but prior to diagnosis or surgery. And Derek, we've discussed this, right? We had John Ritter's death. Very similar circumstance, actually the same hospital.
Yeah, the very same hospital. This is Providence St. Joseph's in Burbank. And Ritter, remember in that episode, he felt chest pain and he vomited. He was actually on the set of one of his final television show, and he was rushed to that same hospital. But Ritter's pain doesn't appear to have been as intense as Thicke's, suggesting that the aortic tear may not have been as catastrophic in his case. But Ritter, you remember the problem in that case was he was initially misdiagnosed. He was told that, or the doctors initially thought that he had a heart attack.
Right.
And when you have a heart attack, you have an obstruction in your blood vessels that you want to thin the blood around it so you can still get the blood flow.
They give aspirin, right? It's a blood thinner. And that's what they did with John Ritter as well. But it was the absolute wrong thing to do in that case. Hence, there was a lot of litigation after the fact.
Sure. It's catastrophic to give a blood thinner with an aortic tear, as we discussed in that episode, because it just makes blood more flow. And you don't want your chest cavity to fill with more blood. You want it to coagulate. So it's the exact wrong move when there's an aortic tear. In Alan Thicke's case, though, it seems like the rupture was so complete, they knew what they had, and they just couldn't save it.
They went in, and apparently for a couple of hours, there's a little conjecture here. The surgeon said what they said, but a little conjecture that I read about, and they sort of said, you go in there when you have one of these absolute ruptures, and it is blood everywhere, and you're doing your best to staunch the blood, but you have to get other apparatus in place in order to allow oxygen to flow to the other to the organs. If you shut off the heart altogether, obviously you're gonna lose that blood flow.
And even though he's in a good shape, he's a 70-year-old fit guy. He played a lot of hockey. He's still a 70-year-old man.
70 years old. That's exactly right.
So saving someone from a tear that pronounced, it must have filled his cavity with blood, and there's no turning back from that.
Yeah. Alan Thicke was charming and popular from the start. He was voted most likely to succeed in middle school and elected prom king in high school. Everyone liked Alan. He was athletic, handsome, funny, and immensely talented, and it was clear he was going places. After college, he quickly landed writing and producing gigs with prominent Canadian daytime talk shows, and then in 1975, at just 28 years old, he became the youngest TV game show host in Canadian broadcasting history with the launch of a show called Face the Music. Over the next few years, Thicke became one of Canada's most famous TV personalities, hosting 2 more game shows and then 2 talk shows, the latter being an American late-night show called The Thicke of the Night, which was heavily promoted as a rival for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. That hope was short-lived. Thicke of the Night was a ratings disaster and was canceled after just 1 season. But it exposed Thicke to a nationwide audience and also, as an aside, introduced the Red Hot Chili Peppers to much of the world in March 1984 for their first live national television appearance.
And plugging in now, the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
But as busy as Thicke was in front of the camera, his greatest pop culture contributions during this time, and perhaps his most lasting legacy, was his creation of some of the most iconic TV theme songs of the era.
This is your favorite thing about Alan Thicke. You've talked about it since we've known each other, about how incredibly important he is in the history of jingles.
TV theme songs.
Listen,
no irony at all. This is who I am. On my Spotify, I have a playlist of iconic TV theme songs, and I often just play it. And about 60% of them are Alan Thicke related in some way. There's Growing Pains, Different Strokes, one of my favorite songs in the world. It's a beautiful sort of intro song. They are 80s jingles. They're kind of funny. They typically kind of short. He did game show theme songs, Joker's Wild, Celebrity Sweepstakes, Blank Check, the opening score of Wheel of Fortune. Some of them don't even have words. He was truly a musician. And in the beginning, you mentioned, look, he was telegenic. This guy was handsome in that classic 80s dad kind of
beautiful
way.
hair.
Beautiful head of hair. Spoke with sort of a smooth lilt to his voice. Very sort of inoffensive in the best possible sense of the word. Just a sort of nice looking guy with a nice voice. But he was also a really good songwriter, and the Facts of Life theme song is the one that stands out the most. His wife at the time, Gloria Loring, who's the mother of Robin Thicke, their son, the theme song's really just great. Take a listen.
You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. The facts of life. There's a time you gotta go and show you grow, and now you know about the facts of life. The facts of life. When the world never seems to be living up to your dreams, and suddenly you're finding out the facts of life are all about you.
I said to my wife last night, I said, is it the most famous theme song in television history? She dismissed me out of hand, but I stand behind it.
I stand with you, Jason.
Yeah.
Because
Cheers is big, but
Cheers is gigantic.
Yeah.
But we still quote this. We'll be in the room sometimes, and someone will say, "Hey, you take the good," and invariably one of the guys in our age group will say, "You also take the bad.
You take them all, and there you have, right? Exactly. So the cancellation of Thicke's late-night talk show in 1985 turned out to be a blessing in disguise because he was immediately asked to audition for a starring role in a new sitcom being pitched to ABC called Growing Pains. Thicke shared his audition with his eventual co-star, Joanna Kearns, and the two had instant chemistry. There were unconfirmed rumors of a romantic relationship between the two. They apparently were both recently divorced when the show started. But whatever happened off-screen, their on-screen relationship became the centerpiece of one of the most successful TV shows of the 80s. They played two parents trying to navigate the difficulties of raising teenagers in suburban Long Island.
Honey, where are you going?
To apologize to Mike.
Apologize? For what? He was the one that lied to us.
Well, I shouldn't have lost my temper, Maggie. If ever there was a time for reason, that was it.
Jason, you are not going to apologize to anyone. This is a time to get tough. This is a time to forget reasoning. Remember, we're the parents. We're in charge. Let's just tell him that if he doesn't go to school, the freebies stop.
You're right. I'm going to bed.
Good. Honey, the bedroom's this way.
You're going to get a bite to eat.
Derek, the show is definitely a product of its time. It is stacked with all those campy one-liners, and whether funny or not, they got that raucous reactions from the laugh
live
track.
studio audience,
Absolutely.
and so forth. Yeah.
But the show also dabbled in moments of genuine warmth and drama, typically positioned as life lessons, something that we would see more and more of, I think, as television went on.
I think that's right. I think of TV as a series of different eras. In the 50s, you had these very squeaky clean shows. You had Leave It to Beaver, My Three Sons. It was all wholesome. And then now, in sort of the modern era, you have shows like The Sopranos, where it's all built around an anti-hero. It's all very dark, and you deal with real themes. And in the middle, you had shows like Growing Pains, which were sort of a transition between these two worlds. All in the Family obviously did this early on, where they would deal with dark themes of rape and social issues of the day. But Growing Pains, in its more palatable sort of 80s comedic way, did the same thing. They would have these very special episodes. Leonardo DiCaprio was on the show, and he played, I believe, a sort of homeless kid who was adopted by the family and dealt with all of the multitude issues going on in the country with homelessness at the time, and to deal with them in that way.
And you were right. There was a spectrum, right? We started with All in the Family. Those issues weren't about kids, but they were about race was certainly the preeminent issue of All in the Family. But then you get, I remember as a kid, Different Strokes. They had the issue. The
Dudley
stories,
got molested in an episode.
Exactly. Sexual assault on children, that whole thing. And Growing Pains and The Cosby Show, which were contemporaries of one another on the almost exact same years, also both featured a doctor who is largely around the house and taking care of an ever-expanding family, that sort of thing. But they both dealt with these issues, not every episode, but once in a while. And it was all a very moral take on things, recognizing that kids will be kids and you have to give them some, enough rope, but at the same time, coming out positively.
Yeah, this was also Reagan's America. Remember, Nancy Reagan ran the Just Say No campaign. Different Strokes had a famous episode with a tie-in to the Just Say No campaign where I believe Arnold met Nancy Reagan on the show. They would do things like that. So this was the age of the moral majority. Those themes were in these episodes.
Of one of those very special episodes of Growing Pains where Mike Seaver got offered cocaine at a party and he had to come home and he told his dad about it and kind of broke down, but his dad was delighted. He didn't try it.
Yes.
He stood up to the peer pressure, and that was ultimately the moral lesson. You can deal with peer pressure and you'll be okay.
And Kirk Cameron was a product of that era and has become
We will talk about him in just a minute.
And by the second season of Growing Pains, it was getting between 12 and 15 million viewers every single week, almost incomprehensible numbers when looked at in the context of today's more fragmented TV landscape. But because it was seen by that many people, Growing Pains became a huge part of pop culture, producing water cooler moments for millions of people around the world. And as successful as the show was, it also generated its fair share of controversy. Remember, Jason, when Tracy Gold, the actress who played one of the Seaver daughters, put on weight during the show's hiatus? The writers added to the script a series of fat jokes told at Gold's expense.
Can you imagine something like that happening?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a young actress, by the way? She was a child actress.
She was 19,
the daughter.
She was 19 by this point when this all happened.
Right, but young and impressionable.
Yeah, but during the summer, between shootings, she put on some weight. And she comes back and they're like, oh, how are we going to deal with this?
Oh, let's have Mike make jokes about her weight.
About how fat
season.
she is. Exactly.
It's staggering to think about, but this was the era of Hollywood. And this was a huge show. This wasn't doing it in a transgressive way. It was dealing with it the way they thought they had to.
Right.
Producers also hired a nutritionist to oversee a 500 calorie per day diet for the 19-year-old to combat her weight gain. Just a horrific sort of prescription for someone who is already facing fat jokes on set.
But they felt it was essential for the show's viability to not have her be overweight.
Unbelievable. And later in the show's run, Gold developed a profound eating disorder that nearly took her life. She got down to 80 pounds at one point and had to be written out of the show for a time just to enable her to get the treatment she needed. This was a big issue in the 80s. I remember she became the poster child for eating disorders for a period of time because largely due to the fact that Growing Pains was such a big show. She was very, very famous at the time. And it highlighted the issue. After Karen Carpenter, I think of Tracy Gold.
Yeah, and when she came back, she was skeletal. I mean, it's very hard to look at.
Pictures of her in People magazine,
it's like the last couple seasons, maybe, she got so thin on the show that they sort of would only show her from the neck up and stuff. It was a terrible, sad thing. And the producers of the show, not blaming any of the cast, who knows, how much power Alan Thicke had at the time, but the producers of the show had a lot of culpability in that. I mean,
Absolutely.
The pressure they put on this poor girl in the 500 calorie per day diet, my goodness.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Kirk Cameron, the show's breakout star for his portrayal of the wisecracking and troublemaking Mike Seaver. Cameron became a born-again Christian during the show's run and insisted that plot lines be edited to remove any content he felt was inappropriate. He was also accused of getting one actor fired off the show, a woman named Julie McCullough, who played the kid's nanny, because he learned she had once posed for Playboy. Cameron's antics alienated him from his fellow cast members, and though he has since apologized for his conduct during those years, it doesn't seem there's been much of a reconciliation. There have been a few made-for-the-cameras reunions between the cast in which Cameron was either not present or, in the one case he was included, there's a clear divide between him and the others. Even the famously affable Alan Thicke excluded Cameron from his wedding in the mid-90s, which was attended by every other castmate. Indeed, Thicke was very close to the group for the rest of his life, especially his on-screen wife, Joanna Kearns, who described Thicke as her closest friend in the world. After he died, she paid tribute to Alan. While poking a bit of fun at him for his penchant for dating young, beautiful women, she said, quote, "I loved Al. When you pretend to love someone day after day, year after year, you see all their faults and foibles and learn to accept them as they are. There is a connection that happens that is hard to explain. I had that with Alan. So here's to my dear friend Al. May you rest in peace, and may your angels be youthful, tall, buxom, and witty. May they also be as gorgeous as all of your wives, and as generous and clever as you." And Tracy Gold, who suffered so much while on the show, honored Alan as her guiding light, who got her through the difficult times, saying, quote, "In 1985, the Seavers became a family, and Alan was our patriarch. I looked up to Alan and admired him greatly. I always listened to his advice and wisdom. I thought we had so much time. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I am so honored to have been his daughter for 7 beautiful years. I love you, Alan, and will miss you forever." But no one has spoken more lovingly about Alan Thicke than his real-life son, Robin, who called his father, quote, "the greatest man I ever met, my hero, my best friend, my first phone call. A big tree has fallen. That's what my dad was, the big tree. Now here I am, this medium-sized tree, and I've got to grow my branches and protect everybody. Every day, I try to make him proud of me."